At Aurora Point Geothermal Research Station in Iceland, Dr. Aristhorn sat reviewing the concerning biological profile of the upcoming KRYLL delegation for the third time that day. The holographic display highlighted the key concerns in pulsing red: temperature sensitivity above 15 degrees Celsius, extreme pressure sensitivity, and cellular structures vulnerable to heat degradation. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair as he glanced at the preparation checklist. The specially cooled reception area was ready, environmental controls triple-checked, and the station staff had been thoroughly briefed on the protocols. Just another day, trying not to accidentally kill our interstellar guests, he muttered to himself, a habit developed over his 15 years as a xenobiologist and cultural liaison. The KRYLL delegation from Xylos would be his 17th extraterrestrial contact mission, but somehow, this one felt more precarious than most. Their biological needs were at such extreme odds with the natural environment of Earth, even here in the cold reaches of Iceland, that the margin for error was uncomfortably thin. The alert on his comm unit pulsed gently. They had arrived. Eris watched through the observation window as the KRYLL spacecraft, sleek, crystalline, and somehow both substantial and ethereal, descended with barely a whisper onto the landing pad. Even with the specialized cooling units running at maximum capacity, he could feel tiny beads of sweat forming at his temples. The reception area was a frigid 12 degrees Celsius, positively glacial by human standards, but still dangerously close to uncomfortable for their visitors. The craft's translucent entry portal shimmered and dissolved, revealing the delegation as they emerged one by one. Eris's breath caught momentarily. No matter how many species he encountered, that first visual contact never failed to inspire awe. The KRYLL stood tall and slender, their bodies reminiscent of elegant quartz formations. Their semi-translucent skin shimmered with subtle violet undertones, pulsing occasionally with delicate patterns of inner light, their primary form of communication. Each movement was deliberate, almost ethereal. Their discomfort was immediately evident. Despite the carefully controlled environment, the lead delegate, Ambassador Kalen, according to the briefing, shifted slightly, his skin flashing with rapid patterns that Eris recognized as signs of distress. Behind him, another KRYLL, stockier in build but still impossibly elegant, was adjusting what appeared to be an environmental suit control panel embedded in his forearm. Engineer Bohr, Eris remembered, the practical one. Eris stepped forward, careful to maintain the prescribed distance, and performed the greeting ritual he'd been trained to use. A gentle wave of his right hand, accompanied by a small device on his wrist that emitted a soft, modulated light pattern, a crude approximation of their language. "Welcome to Aurora Point," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I am Dr. Eris Thorne, Xenobiological Liaison. We have prepared your accommodations according to the specifications provided. I hope you find them suitable." Ambassador Kalen responded with a dignified series of light pulses along his elongated arms, accompanied by a low-frequency tone that Eris's translation device rendered as, "We appreciate your preparations, Dr. Thorne. The journey has been taxing. Xylos sends its regards through us." The delegation remained clustered close to their ship. The smallest among them, Lyra, the scientist, was already scanning the environment with delicate instruments that extended from her wrist coverings. Her skin patterns were rapid, analytical, constantly changing as she processed data. Behind her, the fourth member stood perfectly still, observing everything with an intensity that was almost palpable. Syl, the historian, recording everything through the complex light patterns rippling across her skin. "If you'll follow me," Eris said, gesturing toward the corridor leading to the main facility, "I'll show you to your quarters and explain our safety measures." He led them through the facility, pointing out the specialized climate controls installed specifically for their visit, the emergency protocols, and the constant monitoring systems that would alert staff to any dangerous fluctuations in temperature or pressure. The KRYLL moved with caution, maintaining precise distances from walls, equipment, and especially anything that might emit heat. As they passed the biochemistry lab, a young technician emerged, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. The effect on the KRYLL delegation was immediate and dramatic. All four visitors recoiled in unison, their skin patterns flashing in alarm patterns so bright that Eris squinted against the sudden illumination. Engineer Bohr emitted a low-frequency sound that Eris's translator didn't catch, but the distress was obvious. "I apologize," Eris said quickly, motioning for the startled technician to retreat. "That's just a heated beverage. Standard for humans, completely harmless to you at this distance." Ambassador Kalen's light patterns stabilized gradually, but the momentary panic had been unmistakable. "We understand intellectually that your species has different tolerances," he said carefully, "but instinct is not so easily controlled." Eris nodded. "Of course. We'll ensure better coordination during your stay." The tour continued without incident until they reached the central junction of the facility. Through a large reinforced window, the sprawling complex of Aurora Point was visible, including, in the distance, the outdoor section where several dome-covered pools steamed gently in the cold Icelandic air. "What are those structures?" Lyra asked, her translator rendering her light patterns into curious, clipped speech. "Those are our thermal relaxation pools," Eris explained. "They utilize the natural geothermal water for staff recreation and stress relief. The water is carefully monitored and controlled for safety and comfort." The response from the KRYLL was subtle but undeniable. Ambassador Kalen's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Lyra's light patterns became chaotic for a brief moment before resuming their methodical rhythm. Engineer Bohr turned away from the window, while Sill's recording patterns intensified, capturing the moment with unusual emphasis. After a moment of tense silence, Ambassador Kalen asked, "What is the precise temperature of these pools?" "They vary," Eris replied, "but typically around 38 to 40 degrees Celsius. They're quite popular among our staff, especially after long shifts." Another silence fell, heavier than before. Something in their reaction went beyond mere biological caution, Eris thought. There was something else, something cultural, perhaps even emotional, in their collective response to the mention of hot water. As he led them to their specially prepared quarters, a sense of unease settled over him. This mission would be challenging in ways he hadn't anticipated. The gulf between their species suddenly seemed wider than the interstellar distances they had crossed to get here. In the days that followed, the KRYLL delegation kept largely to their specially cooled section of the facility. Their ventures into the warmer, human areas were brief and clearly uncomfortable, despite their protective environmental suits. Eris observed that even mentioning temperature changes caused visible distress in their light patterns. Mealtimes posed a particular challenge. Eris had arranged for Earth foods to be cooled to temperatures the KRYLL could tolerate, but they approached each offering with extreme caution. Lyra would scan every dish meticulously, analyzing its chemical composition before any of them would take the smallest, most reluctant taste. They relied primarily on nutrient bars brought from xylos, consuming them with what Eris interpreted as relief. "Your species' method of chemical transformation of organic matter through heat application is fascinating," Lyra remarked during one meal as she watched Eris eat a chilled sandwich. "On xylos, we utilize enzymatic processes and controlled acidic environments for similar purposes." "Cooking, you mean?" Eris smiled. "It's so fundamental to human culture that we hardly think about it. The application of heat to food unlocks flavors, destroys harmful pathogens, breaks down tough fibers. It's both science and art for us." The KRYLL exchanged rapid light patterns among themselves, a conversation Eris couldn't follow. Ambassador Kalen finally responded. "The concept of voluntarily applying destructive thermal energy to consumables and finding it pleasurable is difficult for us to comprehend." Eris tried several times to explain human concepts of comfort and relaxation as they related to warmth, but each attempt was met with either confusion or polite silence. The KRYLL seemed unable to grasp why humans would seek warmth beyond what was necessary for survival. On Xylos, Syl explained during one such conversation, her movements graceful and measured as her skin displayed complex historical patterns. Excess heat is associated only with geological danger, volcanic eruptions, geothermal instabilities, never with comfort. The cultural exchange became increasingly strained despite Eris's best efforts. Then, on the fifth day, came the incident that would change everything. Engineer Bohr was inspecting a life support system in their quarters, checking that the cooling mechanisms were functioning optimally. As he reached behind a panel, his hand accidentally brushed against a partially insulated pipe carrying warm water, only around 25 degrees Celsius, but significantly above the KRYLL comfort threshold. The reaction was immediate and alarming. Bohr yanked his hand away with startling speed, emitting a series of high-intensity light pulses and low-frequency sounds that overwhelmed Eris's translation device. The other KRYLL rushed to his side, their own patterns reflecting urgent concern. "What happened?" Eris asked, keeping his distance as Ambassador Kalen and Lyra attended to Bohr. "Thermal contact," Kalen said tersely. "He will recover, but it was distressing." Later that evening, after ensuring Bohr was indeed recovering with no lasting damage, Eris retreated to his quarters and accessed the interplanetary database, searching for deeper cultural context. The official briefing materials on KRYLL biology and culture were comprehensive about their physical needs, but strangely limited on their cultural attitudes toward heat. After hours of searching, he found an obscure reference in an anthropological appendix. Mentions of the thermal purge era in ancient KRYLL history, when defilers of structure were punished by dissolution in thermally activated fluid. The entry was frustratingly vague, but it suggested that the KRYLL's fear went beyond mere biological incompatibility. There was historical trauma there, possibly even religious or moral dimensions. Eris's suspicions were further confirmed when, the next day, Lyra and Ambassador Kalen began asking very specific questions about human safety regulations for water temperature, the limits of human skin tolerance, and whether there were exceptions to human heat exposure capabilities. "I'm curious," Lyra said, her light patterns methodical and precise, "about the maximum duration a human can endure immersion in water at temperatures of 38 to 40 degrees Celsius without suffering cellular degradation or neural damage." "Indefinitely, essentially," Eris replied. "At those temperatures, there's no damage at all. In fact, it's therapeutic for us. It improves circulation, relaxes muscles, often helps with joint pain." The KRYLL exchanged those rapid, private communications again, their patterns more agitated than usual. "And this is comfortable?" Ambassador Kalen asked, emphasizing the word as if it were a foreign concept. "Very much so," Eris confirmed. "Some people find it so relaxing they fall asleep, though we don't recommend that for safety reasons." The conversation ended abruptly when Bohr signaled something to the ambassador, who promptly announced they needed to return to their quarters to process this anomalous data. As they departed, Eris became increasingly convinced that there was a cultural taboo or historical horror related to hot water that the KRYLL had not disclosed. The tension between their cultures was building silently, like pressure in a geothermal system. Thinking that the scientific aspects might appeal to them, Eris arranged a carefully controlled tour of the geothermal power plant's observation area, where temperatures were strictly regulated. Lyra showed immense interest in the technology that harvested energy from the Earth's interior, but the entire delegation maintained a constant tension, their light patterns muted and cautious. They stood on a reinforced glass observation platform overlooking one of the main generation chambers. Lyra was asking detailed questions about energy conversion rates when a movement below caught the attention of the KRYLL delegation. Through another observation window that looked out onto the thermal relaxation pools, they could see several station staff members relaxing in the steaming water, laughing and talking. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The KRWL's light patterns erupted in violent, chaotic flashes. Syl emitted a low, vibrating tone that resonated painfully in Eris's chest. Engineer Bohr retreated as if electrocuted, pressing himself against the far wall of the observation deck. Lyra began a disjointed, rapid analysis of protein denaturation and cellular damage at those temperatures. Based on KRYLL biology, Eris realized. Ambassador Kalen turned to Eris, his translator rendering his communication in a voice that trembled with shock and horror. Why? Why do your people perform this terrible ritual so openly? It is torture. It is slow destruction. The ambassador demanded to know why humans voluntarily subjected themselves to what the translator rendered as the dissolution punishment, apparently the worst penalty in KRYLL history, reserved for crimes against the very existence of their species. Eris, initially shocked by their reaction, quickly collected himself. There's a fundamental misunderstanding here, he said calmly, keeping his voice steady. What you're seeing is not punishment or torture. For humans, immersion in water at these temperatures is physically pleasurable and healthy. He launched into a detailed explanation of human biology, about heat tolerance, thermoregulation systems, the comfortable sensations and health benefits, muscle relaxation, minerals that humans experience from hot water. He emphasized repeatedly that this was relaxation, not torture. Our cellular structures, protein stability thresholds, and nerve conduction parameters are completely different from yours, he explained. What would be destructive for your species is beneficial for ours. The KRYLL listened, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with their deeply held beliefs and history. Lyra began frantic calculations on her device, comparing the human biological data Eris provided with that of the KRYLL. She muttered about fundamental differences in protein structure and neural conduction thresholds. In our history, Ambassador Kalen finally said, his light pattern subdued and solemn, the worst criminals, those who betrayed our entire species, were executed by immersion in heated fluid. It caused excruciating dissolution of our silicon-based cellular structures. It is our most ancient horror, embedded in our collective memory through historical records and cultural transmissions. To see beings voluntarily submitting to what appears identical to our most dreaded punishment is difficult to process. Understand, Eris said softly. Cultural context shape perception. What looks like torture to you is comfort to us, just as your low-temperature environments would cause hypothermia in humans. The delegation withdrew to their quarters to process this anomalous data, leaving Eris with a deeper understanding of the gulf between their worlds, but also with the first real opportunity for meaningful connection. In the following days, the KRYLL, particularly Lyra and Syl, spent considerable time observing the thermal relaxation pools from a safe distance, using advanced scanners to analyze the water's chemical composition, thermal flow patterns, and even the non-invasive physiological responses of the bathers. They interviewed Eris and several volunteers about the subjective experience of being in hot water. Bohr, with Lyra's assistance, designed a small experiment. They took a sample material with a structure similar to KRYLL skin and immersed it in water from the pools, gradually cooled. The results confirmed Eris's explanation. At those temperatures, the material did not dissolve as they had feared, although there were microscopic structural changes they didn't fully understand. However, none of them dared to make direct contact. Then came the crisis that would change everything. An unexpected geological event occurred. A secondary geothermal vent near the facility suddenly became more active, causing an uncontrolled eruption of steam and superheated water near a storage module containing precious material samples from xylos, brought for comparative research purposes. The heat and dense steam made it impossible for humans to approach quickly without special protective equipment, which would take time to prepare. Eris realized that the KRYLL environmental suits, although not designed for such high temperatures, could withstand the conditions for a short period, a few minutes, just long enough to reach and activate the emergency isolation system for the module, preventing irreparable damage to the samples. But this would require them to pass through an area of hot steam, directly confronting their greatest horror. He presented the situation to Ambassador Kalen in the Emergency Response Center. Your environmental suits could withstand the temperature and steam density for approximately 3 minutes, enough time to reach the emergency controls and activate the isolation protocols. The samples would be saved, but I completely understand if we are unwilling to face our most primal fear, Kalen finished for him. A tense discussion ensued among the KRYLL members through their light patterns and low-frequency sounds. Lyra presented data on the short-term tolerance of their suits. Bohr outlined the technical risks. Syl recorded this historic moment. Kalen, after heavy deliberation, looked at Eris, then at the monitor showing the threatened module. He made his decision. We will act. Myself, Bohr for technical expertise, and Lyra for on-site analysis. The preparation was rapid but thorough. Eris provided detailed guidance on the route, the exact location of the emergency controls, and constant updates on temperature readings. The three KRYLL checked each other's environmental suits, their movements precise despite the obvious tension in their light patterns. We are ready, Kalen announced, his pattern steady but intense. With Eris guiding them via comms, the three KRYLL entered the hot steam cloud, moving quickly through what represented the embodiment of death in their culture. Through the monitoring system, Eris could see their life signs, elevated but stable. Their suit sensors showed rapidly rising temperatures, but still within tolerance. You're doing well, he encouraged them. 50 meters to the control panel. Their progress was steady, but clearly difficult. The steam thickened, obscuring visual contact. Eris relied on their suit trackers to monitor their position. 30 meters. 20. You're almost there. Bohr's voice came through the comms, translated but clearly strained. The ambient temperature is exceeding suit comfort parameters. Keep moving. Kalen's response was firm. Suits are still within safety tolerance. Finally, they reached the control panel. Lyra, whose scientific knowledge was critical, accessed the system while Bohr provided technical support. Kalen maintained communication with Eris. Isolation protocols activated. Lyra reported after what seemed an eternity. Samples secure. Withdraw immediately, Eris instructed. Your suit temperatures are approaching critical. Their retreat was faster than their approach. As they emerged from the steam cloud, the human technical team was waiting with cooling equipment for their suits, which showed signs of mild thermal overload, but had protected them successfully. There was a moment of profound silence between Eris and Kalen as the KRYLL delegation recovered. No words were needed. Mutual respect had increased exponentially. The humans were amazed at the KRYLL's courage in facing their inherent fear. The KRYLL were grateful for Eris's precise guidance and the fact that they had survived contact with their greatest threat, albeit indirectly through their suits. The incident became a catalyst. Lyra proposed a formal joint research project comparing thermal adaptation capabilities of Earth and Xylos organisms, with Aurora Point's participation. Bohr discussed with human engineers about applying KRYLL principles of efficient low-temperature heat exchange to Earth's geothermal systems. Syl began compiling a detailed historical account of the visit and this perceptual shift for the KRYLL archives. On their departure day, the atmosphere was completely transformed. Kalen, in a formal address, acknowledged their profound perceptual error and expressed admiration for humanity's remarkable mastery of hostile environments. They no longer viewed hot water as a symbol of death, but as a symbol of biological difference and remarkable adaptability. As a parting gift, they presented Eris with a perfect Xylos crystal, containing three-dimensional data on the proposed joint research initiative and a recording of Syl's light patterns expressing their new understanding. Eris stood watching the KRYLL ship depart. He glanced toward the now-secure storage module, then to the steam rising from the thermal relaxation pools in the distance. He realized that sometimes the best way to understand another culture isn't to avoid their most terrifying differences, but to face them together. In the years that followed, the KRYLL Human Thermal Adaptation Research Initiative became a model for interspecies scientific collaboration. Lyra became a regular correspondent with Eris. Her initial fear transformed into scientific fascination. Bohr's thermal exchange principles revolutionized certain aspects of Earth's geothermal technology. Sill's historical account became required study for all KRYLL considering interspecies contact. And Ambassador Kalin, upon returning to Xylos, began advocating for a fundamental reassessment of their cultural attitudes toward heat, not as an enemy to be feared, but as a form of energy to be understood and respected. Aurora Point expanded its research focus to include comparative xenobiology, with a special emphasis on thermal adaptation across species. The facility became known throughout Earth and beyond as a place where the seemingly insurmountable barriers between vastly different species could be overcome through science, courage, and understanding. Dr. Eris Thorne eventually published Thermal Perceptions Across Silicon and Carbon-Based Life, which became a foundational text in the emerging field of xenocultural psychology. In it, he wrote, "The most valuable discovery is not that other species perceive the universe differently than we do. That much is obvious. The revelation is that by understanding these perceptual differences, we can glimpse alternate realities that expand our own consciousness. What appears as certain death to one being may be comfort to another. In this understanding lies the true potential of interspecies contact." Years later, after numerous exchanges and collaborative projects, a small, carefully designed and thoroughly tested hot spring was installed at the Xylos Embassy on Earth. While no KRYLL would ever immerse themselves in it, they had come to appreciate its symbolic importance, a testament to the possibility of understanding across biological chasms once thought unbridgeable. The final paragraph of Sill's historical account, later shared with Earth historians, perhaps summarized it best. "We came to Earth believing we understood the boundaries of life's possibilities. We encountered beings who thrived in what we perceived as death itself. We departed with the humbling knowledge that the universe contains more wonders than our biology or history prepared us to comprehend. This is not a diminishment, but an expansion, the true gift of reaching across the stars." The humming of the environmental systems provided a constant backdrop to Alara Vance's thoughts as she hunched over her workstation. 6 months at Deep Echo Observation Station had taught her to find comfort in the mechanical symphony that kept her alive amid the void. Her fingers moved with practiced precision across the holographic interface, adjusting parameters as she analyzed the latest batch of weak space signals. "Computer, increase spectral resolution on Quadrant 7, she said, her voice steady and methodical. The station's aging AI complied with a soft chime, revealing new patterns in the cosmic noise. Alara's eyes, sharp despite the months of isolation, caught a peculiar oscillation. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. That was the nature of her work as an astrolinguist and signal decoder. Endless patience, punctuated by brief moments of possibility. Most would find the isolation maddening, but Alara had always preferred the company of stars and equations to that of humans. Out here, in a dense, barely charted asteroid belt at the edge of explored space, she found a strange peace in her methodical search for extraterrestrial intelligence. A sudden tremor shook the station, making the lights flicker. Alara straightened, checking her emergency readouts. Computer, status report. Electromagnetic storm detected. Intensity, Class 3. Communications array, offline. Primary power, functioning at 67% capacity. Secondary systems, initializing emergency protocols. The computer's voice faltered on the last word, replaced by a concerning silence. Alara frowned. The asteroid belt was known for its electromagnetic disturbances, but this one had arrived without warning. She initiated a damage assessment routine, her movements calm and precise despite the potential danger. Years of training had ingrained in her a response to crisis that was almost detached. Panic solved nothing. Observation solved everything. As the station's backup systems gradually stabilized, Ilera didn't notice the shadow that briefly passed across one of her security monitors. In the darkness of an unused maintenance shaft, Xylia adjusted her biomembrane suit, which allowed her to blend nearly perfectly with her surroundings. The electromagnetic storm had caused minor damage to her small scout vessel, forcing her to dock with the human station earlier than planned. Not ideal, but adaptable. The best hunts required flexibility. Her pupils, vertical slits that could expand to capture the faintest light, studied the human female through the ventilation grating. The proving hunt was Xylia's chance to secure her place in Umbral society, to demonstrate her worthiness by harvesting the intense fear energy of a sentient being. Her entire future depended on this ritual. Xylia's skin rippled slightly, the chromatophores beneath it adjusting instinctively to better match the metallic walls. She had studied human responses extensively in preparation. They were known for their strong fear signatures, particularly when isolated. This lone female would be vulnerable, far from her kind, with nowhere to flee. Perfect prey. Her hunt elders had taught her the stages. First cause unease, then escalate to anxiety, then push into terror. The psychic emissions from pure terror were the most nourishing, the most potent. Yet there was something odd about this human. Xylia sensed a mental discipline she hadn't expected, a calm that seemed unnatural. No matter. All sentience broke eventually. Ilera finished her primary systems check and began a more thorough damage assessment. Moving through the station's narrow corridors, she methodically documented each affected system, her steps echoing on the metal floors. As she reached the auxiliary power coupling, she paused. Something wasn't right. The access panel to the environmental duct had been manipulated, not damaged in the storm, but precisely opened and then carefully replaced. Someone wanted it to look undisturbed. "Computer, run internal security scan," she commanded, kneeling to examine the panel more closely. Security scan unavailable. System malfunction. Ilera straightened, feeling the hair on the back of her neck rise. Deep Echo was designed to be largely automated, requiring minimal crew. She was the only human aboard. Yet her instincts, honed by years of recognizing patterns in cosmic noise, told her she was no longer alone. Rather than fear, a scientific curiosity kindled within her. She pulled out her personal datapad and began documenting the anomaly, her analytical mind already forming hypotheses. From the shadows, Xylia observed with growing confusion. The human had discovered her entry point, yet showed no fear, only interest. This was not the expected response. Females of most species demonstrated heightened fear responses compared to males, particularly when alone. That's why she had selected this target. Xylia decided to escalate. That night, as the station's lights dimmed to simulate Earth's diurnal cycle, she began her fear induction protocol. First, subtle sounds in distant corridors, scratching, tapping, moving. Then, quick movements at the periphery of vision, a shadow darting just as the human turned. Finally, manipulation of the environmental systems, a momentary drop in oxygen levels, a brief temperature plunge, lights flickering in random patterns. These techniques had reduced stronger beings to whimpering wrecks, their fear energy flowing like a feast. But this human was different. Ilera documented each occurrence meticulously. Computer, log anomaly 17. Temperature drop of 7 degrees Celsius in Sector 4. Duration 12 seconds. No apparent mechanical cause. She checked her portable atmospheric analyzer and added, oxygen concentration temporarily decreased by 3%, returned to normal within 20 seconds. Instead of hiding in her quarters, Ilera systematically investigated each disturbance, setting up additional sensors and cameras from her personal equipment. She created a map of the anomalies on her datapad, searching for patterns, treating the situation like a complex scientific problem rather than a threat. The lack of substantial fear emissions was beginning to weaken Xylia. Hunt protocol dictated that she should receive regular psychic nourishment from increasing prey anxiety, but the human's emotions were providing only the thinnest sustenance, curiosity, mild concern, intellectual engagement, but no fear. If this continued, she would need to break protocol and force a confrontation earlier than planned. 3 days into her observations, Elara made a breakthrough. The pattern of disturbances showed intelligence. Not random failures, but methodical testing. Whatever was on the station was studying her reactions. Computer, access Deep Echo Historical Database, security classification, all levels. Access denied. Security clearance insufficient. Elara's eyes narrowed. As the chief scientist assigned to the station, she should have had access to all non-restricted files. This suggested an intentional information barrier. Someone didn't want her to know something about Deep Echo. She retrieved a specialized decryption device from her personal effects. Not standard equipment, but something she had developed during her doctoral work on cryptographic communication systems. After connecting it to an auxiliary database terminal, she began the painstaking process of bypassing the security protocols. Hours later, her persistence was rewarded with fragments of restricted data, cryptic reports mentioning shadow entities and psychic energy consumers from previous exploration missions in this sector. Most were heavily redacted or corrupted, but one file contained a partial sensor reading of an unidentified life form with unusual energy signatures. Computer cross-referenced these energy patterns with station anomalies from the past 72 hours. Working. Match found. Correlation coefficient, 89%. Elara sat back, her mind racing. She wasn't dealing with system malfunctions or hallucinations. She was experiencing first contact with a non-human intelligence. Rather than fear, she felt a surge of excitement. This was why she had come to Deep Echo, to find evidence of extraterrestrial life. And now, it seemed that life had found her. Xylia observed the human's reaction to discovering the redacted files with growing concern. Instead of the expected terror at realizing she was being hunted, the woman's emotional output had actually intensified in joy, excitement. These were not fear signatures. They could not sustain an umbral. Worse, the human was beginning to understand too much. Xylia's hunt elders had warned that humans occasionally showed dangerous levels of adaptability, but this specimen was exceeding all parameters. A strange respect began to form within Xylia, though she tried to suppress it. Respect for prey was the first step toward hunt failure. At the next communication window, with the Umbral mothership, Xylia would need to report this anomaly. But would that mean admitting her inability to generate sufficient fear? The shame would be considerable. She needed to succeed. Her entire standing within the Umbral hierarchy depended on this proving hunt. Deciding on a new approach, Xylia began to leave deliberate traces of her presence. Not to frighten, but to communicate. A symbol carved into a wall plate here, an arranged pattern of small objects there. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to do this. It contradicted all hunt protocols. Yet something about this human's response intrigued her in ways she had never experienced with prey before. Elara discovered the symbols during her daily station check. Recognizing them as intentional communication attempts, she responded by leaving mathematical sequences displayed on various terminals throughout the station. Universal constants, prime number series, simple geometric progressions. If the entity was intelligent enough to stalk her, perhaps it was intelligent enough to recognize these as non-random. She added visual representations of DNA and atomic structures, basic building blocks that any advanced species might recognize. It was a long shot, but attempting communication was preferable to waiting passively to become a victim. Meanwhile, Elara continued her efforts to access the station's classified files, gradually piecing together a disturbing picture. Deep Echo wasn't merely an observation outpost. It appeared to be a deliberate lure, positioned in this electromagnetic-heavy asteroid belt to attract the attention of the very entities mentioned in the classified reports. EtherCorp, the private conglomerate that had built and supposedly abandoned the station, had been conducting covert research on these energy feeders for decades. The revelation sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't a randomly assigned scientist. She was bait. Xylia found herself drawn to the humans' mathematical displays, particularly the sequences of prime numbers and atomic structures. They resonated with concepts taught in Umbral education about universal constants. This prey wasn't just resistant to fear tactics. She was actively attempting to establish communication using fundamental cosmic principles. The realization triggered a forbidden curiosity within Xylia. Umbral doctrine taught that prey species were mentally inferior, capable only of basic emotions like fear, suitable solely as sustenance. Yet this human was displaying problem-solving abilities and abstract thinking that rivaled Umbral capabilities. As Xylia studied one of the DNA models, a sudden impact rocked the station. A micrometeoroid had penetrated the outer hull near her concealed position, causing a localized atmospheric breach. The automatic containment systems activated, but not before the decompression caught Xylia off guard, throwing her from her hiding place directly into a corridor. Alara, investigating the breach, turned a corner and came face to face with Xylia. Time seemed to freeze as human and Umbral stared at each other under the harsh emergency lights. Xylia's biomembrane suit had partially malfunctioned from the impact, revealing her true form. Humanoid but distinctly alien, with iridescent skin that shifted colors even as they watched each other. Large eyes with vertical pupils now fully dilated, and a lean, predatory physique. In that moment, Xylia expected the human to finally exhibit the fear response she had been attempting to trigger for days, to scream, to flee, to collapse in terror. It would be a relief, a return to the hunt's natural order. Instead, Alara's eyes widened with what appeared to be recognition, then narrowed in scientific assessment. She tilted her head slightly and, remarkably, made a simple hand gesture, 3 fingers raised, then 2, then 5. The beginning of the Fibonacci sequence. The gesture struck Xylia like a physical blow. This was not the response of prey. This was an intelligent being attempting to establish peaceful contact through mathematics, a universal language. Confusion and doubt flooded Xylia's mind. Her hunt training demanded she attack now, while exposed, to salvage the situation through direct fear harvesting. Yet she found herself responding almost unconsciously, raising her own 6-fingered hand and continuing the sequence. 8, 13. A small smile appeared on Alara's face before the station's automatic systems triggered another emergency protocol, plunging the corridor into darkness as power rerouted to contain the breach. By the time emergency lighting engaged, Xylia had vanished. Back in her hiding place, Xylia battled internal turmoil. She had violated fundamental hunt protocol by engaging in communication with prey. Yet she couldn't deny the exhilaration she had felt in that moment of connection. So different from the satisfaction of fear harvesting, but somehow fulfilling in a different way. Meanwhile, her body was showing signs of energy deprivation. Without substantial fear consumption, her chromatophore control was becoming erratic, her reflexes slower. The Hunt Elders had warned that prolonged hunger could lead to permanent degradation. She needed to complete her mission soon or face physical consequences beyond mere failure. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about the human's response. No fear, only curiosity and an attempt at connection. Alara worked feverishly to access the final encrypted sections of the EtherCorp database. The encounter had confirmed her suspicions. The entity matched the fragmentary descriptions in the classified files. But she needed more information to understand its motivations and capabilities. After 36 consecutive hours of decryption attempts, she finally breached the core server's deepest security protocols. What she found left her stunned. EtherCorp hadn't just been studying these aliens. They'd been attempting to weaponize their fear-feeding ability. The corporation had identified the species, dubbed Umbral, as psychic predators who consumed emotional energy, particularly intense fear. They had established deep echo and similar stations specifically to lure Umbral hunters, hoping to capture specimens for study or potentially develop means of harnessing their abilities for military applications. The files included partial physiological data, behavioral observations, and most disturbingly, records of previous encounters, all ending with the disappearance or death of the human researchers involved. Alara was merely the latest in a series of unwitting subjects placed as bait, her renowned isolation tolerance making her an ideal candidate. "They sent me here to die," she whispered to the empty room. But instead of panic, a calm determination settled over her. If she was dealing with a predator that fed on fear, then her best defense was the very quality that had made her suitable for deep space assignment: her emotional self-regulation and rational approach to danger. She needed to understand more about her visitor, and perhaps find a way to communicate that they were both pawns in EtherCorp's game. Xylia received an unexpected transmission from the Umbral Mothership. The Hunt Elder Corvus himself was addressing her directly, an unusual development that signaled high-level concern about her mission. "Young Hunter, your vital signs indicate inadequate fear consumption." His gravelly voice echoed in her mind through the telepathic link. "Extraction of fear energy from isolated prey should be well underway by now. Explain your failure." Xylia hesitated, knowing the consequences of admitting difficulty. "The human exhibits unusual resistance to fear induction protocols. I am adjusting my approach." "Unacceptable," Corvus replied. "If you cannot successfully complete this proving hunt, you dishonor your lineage. I am dispatching to your location to evaluate the situation personally. Complete your task before my arrival, or I will demonstrate the proper hunting technique, and you will be designated as failed." The transmission ended, leaving Xylia in a state of dread. Corvus was not merely a hunt elder. He was one of the most ruthless and traditional hunters in Umbral society, known for his brutally efficient fear-harvesting techniques. His intervention meant her status was in serious jeopardy. She had less than one orbital cycle to successfully complete her hunt before Corvus arrived. As she contemplated her options, a blaring alarm suddenly echoed throughout the station, followed by a mechanical voice. "Warning, station self-destruct sequence initiated. 30 minutes until critical system overload." Xylia froze. This was not her doing. Something else was happening. Alara cursed as she tried to override the self-destruct sequence. Moments after accessing the core server's final classified files, the system had triggered an automatic purge protocol, EtherCorp's failsafe, to eliminate evidence if their covert research was discovered. "Computer, abort self-destruct. Authorization Vance Alpha Zeta 9. Authorization rejected. Self-destruct sequence locked by remote protocol. 29 minutes remaining." Alara's mind raced through possibilities. The station's escape pod would barely outrun the blast radius given the density of asteroids in the belt. She needed to find another solution. Perhaps the alien visitor had spacecraft capabilities. As if summoned by her thoughts, Xylia appeared at the entrance to the control room, her chromatophore camouflage now only partially effective, revealing glimpses of her true form. "Your people did this," Alara said calmly, continuing to work on the console. "Not you, the humans who built this station. They're trying to eliminate evidence. We're both expendable to them." Xylia hesitated, assessing whether this was some elaborate fear tactic. But the human's emotional signature registered as determined and focused, not deceitful. And the station's systems were clearly in emergency mode. "Ow! Stop!" Xylia managed in halting English, her voice a melodic multi-tone sound. "The self-destruct? I need to reach the manual override in the station's core, but it's behind a radiation shield I can't bypass." Alara gestured to the schematics on her screen. "You might be able to reach it through the maintenance conduits." A standoff ensued, trust hanging as precariously as their lives in the balance. Xylia's hunt training screamed that this was an elaborate trap, that the moment of extreme danger would finally trigger the human's fear response, providing the feast she needed. But something deeper, an instinct beyond her training, told her this human was different. "Help each other," Xylia said finally, the words strange on her tongue. "Live together or die alone." Alara nodded sharply. "I'll guide you through the station systems. You reach the manual override." She pulled up detailed schematics on her datapad. These conduits here, too narrow for me, but you can navigate them. Their unlikely alliance formed in the shadow of a ticking clock. Alara directed Xylia through the station's labyrinthine maintenance system via comm link, while simultaneously working to slow the self-destruct sequence through computational countermeasures. Xylia moved with preternatural grace through narrow passages that would have been impassable for a human. Following Alara's instructions, she navigated toward the station's core, encountering various obstacles: superheated conduits, electrical discharges, automated security measures that tested her physical abilities to their limits. Meanwhile, Alara discovered that someone had remotely accessed the station's systems just before the self-destruct initiated. Not EtherCorp as she had initially suspected, but an Umbral communication signature. Xylia, she said into the comm, using the name she'd gleaned from intercepted transmissions, I think your people may have triggered this. Is someone else coming? A pause, then Hunt Elder Corvus. Coming too. Finish what I could not. Finish? You mean? Alara understood immediately. Kill me. Harvest my fear. Yes. The alien's reply was simple, but laden with complexity Alara could hear even through the distortion. I failed. You did not fear. That's why you've been creating disturbances, trying to frighten me. The final pieces clicked into place in Alara's analytical mind. Your species feeds on fear. Not just feed, need. Without. The weakened D. Alara processed this revelation while continuing to guide Xylia through the maintenance system. But you're helping me now. What? Another long pause. You? Different. You see me. Try to communicate. Not just pray. The simple statement carried profound implications. A predator species questioning its fundamental nature, reconsidering the designation of another sentient being as merely food. Alara recognized the significance of this philosophical breakthrough, but had no time to explore it as the self-destruct countdown continued. 20 meters ahead, then left junction, she instructed, returning to their immediate survival priority. You should see a red access panel. Xylia reached the manual override station with 12 minutes remaining. Following Alara's detailed instructions, she manipulated the unfamiliar human technology, removing safety covers and reconnecting power conduits in precise sequence. Final step, Alara directed. The green crystalline cylinder needs to be rotated 45 degrees clockwise, then pushed inward. Xylia complied, and the station's alarms abruptly ceased. Self-destruct sequence aborted, the computer announced. Warning, unauthorized system access detected. Security protocols engaged. Their relief was short-lived. The station's automated defense systems, triggered by the override, began activating throughout the station. At the same time, external sensors detected an approaching vessel, small, fast, and on a direct course for Deep Echo. Corvus, Xylia confirmed after checking a device on her wrist. He comes to complete my hunt and punish my failure. Alara's mind shifted immediately into strategic planning mode. Then we need to be ready. We can't outrun him, and we can't hide, not from someone who can sense emotions like you can. Not like me, Xylia corrected. Better. Stronger. Corvus is elite hunter. Many successful hunts. Then we need to use what we have, Alara said, pulling up the station schematics again. Deep Echo's research purpose gives us some advantages. There are experimental systems here designed specifically to counter your species' abilities. She highlighted several sections of the station. EtherCorp was studying your people for years. They developed prototype defenses, emotion-baffling fields, psychic disruptors. Most were theoretical, but some were installed as fail-safes. Xylia studied the schematics, her vertical pupils contracting with recognition. These would cause great pain to Umbral. To me also. We'll need to modify them, Alara said. I need you to show me how your perception works, how you sense emotions. Together, we might create something that affects Corvus but spares you. The next hours were a race against time as Xylia explained Umbral's sensory capabilities while Alara worked to reconfigure the experimental systems. They moved through the station together, setting up a series of traps and countermeasures. Their communication evolved rapidly, Xylia's grasp of human language improving with each exchange, Alara developing an understanding of umbral expressions and gestures. In the process, Alara learned more about umbral society, their hierarchical structure based on hunting prowess, their ritualized proving hunts that determined social standing, the strict traditions that governed their interactions with prey species. She began to understand the enormous risk Xylia was taking by allying with her. "If we succeed," she asked as they finalized their preparations, "what happens to you? Can you return to your people?" Xylia's skin darkened, a sign Alara had come to recognize as distress. "No, helping prey is unforgivable crime. I am outcast now. I'm sorry," Alara said, realizing the depth of Xylia's sacrifice. "Choice was mine," Xylia replied. Her skin shifted to a subtle blue tone that Alara hadn't seen before. First time in life. Making own choice. Not following umbral way blindly. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the station's proximity alert. Corvus had arrived. They took their positions, Alara in the central control room, monitoring systems and coordinating their defense. Xylia hidden near the primary airlock where Corvus would most likely enter, ready to spring the first trap. Corvus breached the station with brutal efficiency, cutting through the airlock with an energy tool that sliced through reinforced metal like paper. Unlike Xylia, he made no attempt at stealth. His presence projected raw power and menace. He stood taller than Xylia, his skin a deep obsidian that absorbed light, his movements predatory and confident. He spoke in the umbral language, his voice resonating through the station in a way that made the metal walls vibrate. Xylia, listening from her hiding place, translated for Alara through their comm link. "He says, he smells my weakness, my shame. He will cleanse the dishonor after he completes what I could not." Her voice trembled slightly. "Alara, he is stronger than I expected. His honora is overwhelming." "Stay focused," Alara replied, watching Corvus's progress through the station's cameras. "Remember the plan. Lead him to Junction 7, then activate the first sequence." Xylia revealed herself momentarily to Corvus, then fled deeper into the station. As expected, the Elder Hunter pursued with terrifying speed, his powerful form moving in bursts of acceleration that the cameras barely captured. Alara triggered the first trap as Corvus passed Junction 7. An electromagnetic pulse combined with a specific frequency sound wave that Xylia had indicated would disrupt umbral sensory organs. Corvus staggered momentarily, but recovered with alarming quickness, roaring in fury. "It barely slowed him," Alara reported, moving to secondary countermeasures. The battle continued through the station's labyrinthine corridors. Each trap had greater effect than the last as Alara refined the settings based on Corvus's reactions, but the hunter's raw power and experience allowed him to push through defenses that should have incapacitated him. Xylia engaged him directly several times, using her superior knowledge of the station's layout to strike and retreat. But each encounter left her weakened, her movements slower, her skin color fluctuating erratically. Without fear energy to sustain her, and already weakened from days of inadequate feeding, she was fighting a losing battle of attrition. "He's herding you away from the central hub," Alara warned after the third skirmish. "He's figured out we're working together." "No choice," Xylia gasped, her breathing labored. "Must reach final trap position." Their last-ditch plan centered on the station's experimental psionic amplifier, a device originally designed to magnify and store emotional energy. Alara had reprogrammed it to create feedback loop, hoping it would overwhelm Corvus's sensory capabilities. But they needed to lure him into the amplifier chamber and activate it at precisely the right moment. Xylia would be the bait, placing herself at terrible risk. As she approached the chamber, Corvus suddenly changed tactics. Instead of pursuing Xylia, he doubled back toward the central control room, toward Alara. "He knows," Xylia cried through the comm. "Alara, he's coming for you." Alara remained calm despite the imminent danger. "Then we adapt. New plan. I'll lure him to the amplifier chamber from this direction. Be ready to activate it on my signal. Too dangerous, Xylia protested. No choice, Elara echoed Xylia's earlier words. Trust me. Corvus reached the control room with devastating force, tearing the reinforced door from its frame. Elara stood her ground, facing the massive umbral hunter with the same analytical composure she'd maintained throughout the ordeal. Corvus spoke, his voice a rumbling multi-tone growl. Without Xylia to translate, Elara couldn't understand his words, but his intent was clear. Here, finally, was his prey. The hunter circled her slowly, clearly puzzled by her lack of visible terror. Elara maintained eye contact, her vital signs remarkably stable given the circumstances. You're wondering why I'm not afraid, she said conversationally, slowly backing toward the corridor that would lead to the amplifier chamber. Your kind feeds on fear, but what happens when you encounter someone who's spent their life training to control their emotional responses? Corvus tilted his head, studying her with predatory intensity. I'm a scientist, Elara continued, maintaining her measured retreat. I observe, analyze, and adapt. Fear is a response to the unknown, but I've made understanding the unknown my life's work. The hunter lunged suddenly, faster than human reflexes could counter. His hand closed around Elara's throat, lifting her off the ground. Up close, his alienness was overwhelming, skin that seemed to absorb light itself, eyes with complex, compound-like structures within the pupils, a face that combined humanoid features with something utterly foreign. Elara struggled for breath, but still didn't panic. Instead, she pressed a conceal control on her datapad, activating the station's emergency decompression protocol in the section directly above them. The explosive decompression ripped through the ceiling panels, the violent rush of escaping air creating momentary chaos. Corvus's grip loosened as he fought to maintain his footing. Elara twisted free and sprinted toward the amplifier chamber, trusting the emergency bulkheads would seal before critical atmosphere loss occurred. Corvus recovered quickly and pursued, his rage palpable. The chase led exactly where Elara had planned, through the winding corridors toward the amplifier chamber where Xylia waited. As Elara burst into the chamber, Xylia stood ready at the controls, her skin pulsing with anxious patterns. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of perfect understanding passing between human and alien. Elara dove to one side as Corvus charged into the room. Without hesitation, Xylia activated the modified amplifier. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The chamber filled with swirling energy patterns visible even to human eyes. Corvus froze mid-stride, his entire body convulsing as the psionic feedback overwhelmed his sensory systems. He emitted a high-pitched keening that made Elara cover her ears in pain. Xylia, despite being an umbral herself, seemed less affected, perhaps due to her weakened state or her evolving physiology. She moved purposefully to a secondary control panel and made a series of adjustments, intensifying the field around Corvus. The elder hunter fell to his knees, his fearsome presence diminishing as the amplifier continued its work. His skin lost its obsidian luster, fading to a dull gray. His movements became uncoordinated, almost spastic. What's happening to him? Elara asked, watching in scientific fascination despite the danger. Sensory overload, Xylia explained. For umbral, emotional energy must be processed, filtered. Too much, too fast, system collapses. Corvus made one last attempt to rise, reaching toward Xylia with a clawed hand, before collapsing completely. He lay motionless on the chamber floor, his skin now almost translucent, showing complex internal structures beneath. Is he? Elara couldn't finish the question. Not dead. In stasis. Self-protection when overwhelmed. Xylia approached her fallen elder cautiously. He will recover eventually, but not soon. Elara joined her, studying the incapacitated hunter with scientific interest. What will you do with him? Xylia's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a calm blue. Return him to Mothership. With message for Umbral Council. She looked at Elara, her vertical pupils dilating. There are other ways than fear. In the aftermath, they worked together to secure Corvus in a stasis pod aboard his own ship. Xylia programmed it to return automatically to the Umbral mothership, carrying with it a data package she had prepared, evidence of her experiences with Alara, of communication instead of predation, of cooperation instead of fear. They may not listen, she admitted as they watched the small vessel depart. Tradition is strong among my kind. But you've shown it's possible to change, Alara replied. That's how evolution begins, with one individual adapting to new circumstances. They returned to Deep Echo's control room to assess their situation. The station had sustained significant damage during the confrontation, and Alara's discovery of EtherCorp's true purpose compromised its scientific value. I can't stay here, she said, reviewing the system reports. Even if I could repair everything, I can't trust that EtherCorp won't send someone to eliminate me once they discover their files have been accessed. My scout vessel is functional, Xylia offered. Small, but can reach populated systems. Alara looked at her thoughtfully. And you? What will you do now? Xylia's skin rippled with uncertainty. Cannot return to Umbral society. Cannot stay here. She hesitated, then added, during our battle with Corvus, I felt something new. When working with you, facing danger together without fear, but with courage, I felt sustained. Sustained. Alara's scientific curiosity sharpened. You mean you received energy from something other than fear? Yes. Different energy. Weaker, but cleaner. From your courage, your focus, your... Xylia struggled for the right word. Determination. Alara considered this revelation. So your species might not be limited to feeding on fear alone. There could be alternatives, less predatory, emotional energies that could sustain you. Theory only, Xylia cautioned. But want to explore. Find truth. She looked directly at Alara. Need help to understand. To find others like me who might change. The implication hung between them. A proposal, a new path forward for both of them. A human scientist and an Umbral renegade. Alara mused with a small smile. Researching alternative sustenance methods for psychic predators. That wasn't exactly my original mission parameters. Better mission, Xylia suggested, her skin brightening. More important, as they prepared to leave Deep Echo, Alara gathered the evidence of EtherCorp's unethical experiments, downloading everything onto secure drives. This would be their insurance, and potentially leverage to protect themselves in the future. We need to expose what they've been doing, she said as she worked. Using people as bait, hiding the existence of intelligent alien life, attempting to weaponize your abilities. These are serious violations of interstellar research protocols. Xylia watched the human work, still fascinated by Alara's methodical approach to crisis. Your authorities will believe? Will not fear Umbral. Some will fear, Alara admitted. Fear of the unknown is a powerful human instinct. But others will see the opportunity here, not for weapons, but for understanding, for connection. They loaded the last of their supplies onto Xylia's scout vessel, a sleek craft with organic-looking controls that responded to Xylia's touch with subtle luminescence. The ship was designed for a single occupant, making the space tight for two, but they would manage until reaching a neutral trading outpost. As Deep Echo receded behind them, growing smaller against the backdrop of the dense asteroid field, Alara felt a surprising lack of regret. The station had been her home for 6 months, but it had never truly been what she believed it to be. Her real work, her real discovery, was just beginning. I've been thinking about what you said, she told Xylia as they navigated through the asteroid belt, about feeling sustained by emotions other than fear. It makes evolutionary sense that your species would primarily target fear. It's one of the most powerful and immediate emotional responses, producing significant neurochemical and energetic outputs. But that doesn't mean it's the only viable source. Xylia's skin rippled with interest, the chromatophores creating patterns that Alara was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. In oldest Umbral stories, ancestors fed on many emotions. Over time, specialized in fear. Easier to harvest, more potent. Specialization can be a successful evolutionary strategy, Alara nodded, until the environment changes and adaptability becomes more valuable. Humans adaptable? Xylia asked. Extremely, Alara confirmed. It's perhaps our defining characteristic as a species. We've survived in almost every environment our planet offered through behavioral adaptation rather than physiological specialization. Xylia absorbed this information, her vertical pupils dilating slightly. Perhaps Umbral can learn adaptation, find new ways to sustain. And perhaps humans can learn from Umbral perception, Alara suggested. Your ability to sense emotional energy states could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness and cognition. As their small vessel cleared the asteroid belt, entering open space, the full magnificence of the starfield revealed itself. Both beings paused in their conversation to appreciate the view, one who had spent her life studying these distant lights, and one who had traveled among them as a hunter, now seeing them with new eyes. "Where do we go?" Xylia finally asked. Alara considered carefully. They couldn't return to major human settlements immediately, not with an Umbral in tow and explosive information about Ether Corp's activities. They needed time, resources, and potentially allies. "There's a research outpost on Proxima Centauri B," she said finally. "Run by the Independent Scientific Collective, they operate outside corporate and government oversight. I have colleagues there who might help us without immediately reporting to authorities." Xylia adjusted their course accordingly, her six-fingered hands moving with precision across the organic controls. "Journey will take 17 standard cycles. Close quarters." She glanced at Alara, her skin briefly flushing a color that the human hadn't seen before. "Will not harm you. No hunger for your fear." "I know," Alara replied simply. And she did know, with a certainty that would have seemed irrational just days ago. Their shared battle against Corvus had forged a trust that transcended their biological differences. As the scout ship accelerated to sublight speed, Alara found herself contemplating the unprecedented journey ahead. Not just the physical distance to Proxima Centauri, but the uncharted territory they were entering together. A human and an Umbral, defying the predator-prey relationship that had defined their species' limited interactions. During the journey, they established a research protocol. Alara rigged monitoring equipment to measure the subtle energy emissions that occurred during various emotional states, while Xylia attempted to feed on emotions other than fear, determination during problem-solving exercises, satisfaction at successful outcomes, even a quiet contentment that Alara sometimes felt while stargazing. The results were promising, if preliminary. While no emotion provided the immediate potency that fear did, Xylia found that longer exposure to positive emotional states created a more sustained, if subtle, nourishment. Her physical symptoms of deprivation stabilized, then gradually improved. Her chromatophore control returned, her reflexes sharpened, and most intriguingly, her capacity for abstract thought seemed to expand. "It feels cleaner," she attempted to explain one cycle as they reviewed the data together. "Fear energy is like bright flame. Burns hot, dies quick. These other emotions, slower burn, but no. Residue." "Residue?" Alara inquired, documenting the observation. Xylia struggled to find the words in human language. After consuming fear, especially strong terror, thoughts are chaotic, aggressive, hard to think clearly. Legacy of praise panic, perhaps. But these calmer emotions leave mind clear, focused. This revelation had profound implications. If fear consumption created a feedback loop of aggression and predatory instinct within Umbral psychology, it could explain the species' cultural development as relentless hunters. They weren't just feeding on fear because it was efficient. They were addicted to it, caught in a cycle that perpetuated their predatory nature. "It's like a drug dependency," Alara theorized. "The very thing you consume alters your behavior to ensure you seek more of it." By the 12th cycle, they had developed sufficient trust and communication protocols for Xylia to suggest a more direct experiment. Need to attempt true connection, she said. Umbral can form temporary psychic link with prey, used for tracking, sensing deepest fears, but perhaps could be used differently. Alara hesitated. The scientific value was undeniable, but the personal risk significant. What would it involve? Touch minds, share thoughts, emotions directly. I would not take, only observe, experience your emotional patterns from within. After careful consideration and establishment of safety protocols, Alara agreed. They sat facing each other in the ship's small common area, eyes locked, as Xylia reached out with both physical and psychic senses. The connection formed slowly, cautiously, nothing like the invasive fear harvesting that Umbral typically employed. Alara felt a gentle presence, like a questioning touch at the edges of her consciousness. She focused on remaining calm, allowing the connection without resistance. What followed was extraordinary for both beings. Xylia experienced human emotion from within, not just observing fear responses, but the complex tapestry of curiosity, wonder, analytical thought, and quiet courage that defined Alara. Meanwhile, Alara caught glimpses of umbral perception, the world seen through layers of emotional energy, thoughts structured in patterns rather than linear sequences, memories stored as sensory-emotional complexes rather than narrative events. When they finally separated, both were profoundly affected. Xylia's skin displayed colors Alara had never seen before, pulsating in complex patterns. Alara found her own perception subtly altered, more attuned to the emotional undertones of her thoughts. Not like fear-feeding, Xylia said after several minutes of silence. More like sharing sustenance. Both nourished. Alara nodded, still processing the experience. It was intimacy of a kind I've never experienced. Complete understanding without judgment. This breakthrough accelerated their research. If Umbral could form connections that shared rather than harvested emotional energy, it suggested possibilities for symbiotic rather than predatory relationships. They spent the remaining journey developing protocols for these connections, documenting the effects and theorizing applications. By the time they approached Proxima Centauri, they had compiled substantial evidence for an alternative umbral biology, one not dependent on fear and predation. But they had also developed something neither had anticipated, a profound bond that defied conventional classification. The independent scientific collective's outpost on Proxima Centauri was discreetly hidden within a vast canyon system, its structures blending with the natural rock formations. As Xylia's scout ship approached, Alara transmitted the identification codes that would identify her to her former colleagues. What if they reject us? Xylia asked, her skin betraying anxiety despite her controlled tone. Dr. Wei leads this facility, Alara explained. She's unconventional, even by ISC standards. She values discovery above protocol. If anyone will give us a chance to present our findings before raising alarms, it's her. The landing authorization came through, though with heightened security protocols. As they descended toward the designated pad, they could see figures gathering, curious scientists rather than armed guards, a promising sign. Ready? Alara asked as the ship settled onto the landing pad. Xylia's skin cycled through several colors before settling into a steady, resolved pattern. Together, she replied. They exited the craft side by side, the human scientist and the umbral renegade, carrying with them not just evidence of corporate malfeasance and first contact, but the beginning of something revolutionary. Proof that even the most fundamental biological imperatives could be transcended through understanding, courage, and connection. As they stepped forward to meet the waiting scientists, Alara felt not fear, but possibility. The same emotion that had sustained her through years of searching the stars for signs of intelligence. She had finally found it, though not in the distant signal she had been decoding, but in the unlikely alliance forged in darkness and danger. The universe, she realized, was far stranger and more wonderful than even she had imagined, and they were just beginning to explore it.